Imagine waking up one morning to find your most valuable possession stolen. Not by a stranger, but by the very person who's supposed to protect the community. That's exactly what happened to Jason when his power-hungry HOA president decided his solar panels didn't fit the aesthetic of the neighborhood and had them removed. But she had no idea she had just started a war, one that would end with the most electrifying payback imaginable. It was supposed to be a peaceful morning. Jason had always loved waking up early, enjoying the quiet hum of his solar panels as they soaked in the first rays of sunlight. But that day, something was wrong. Instead of the usual serenity, he was jolted awake by an ear-piercing scream that shattered the stillness. Jason shot up in bed, his heart pounding. He threw on a robe and rushed outside, following the sound of what could only be described as pure rage. The sight that met his eyes made his stomach drop. His solar panels were gone. The entire array, thousands of dollars worth of high-efficiency, eco-friendly panels, had been ripped straight off his roof. All that remained were a mess of exposed wires and the sickening realization that he had just been robbed. And standing there, looking smugger than ever, was Brenda, the self-proclaimed queen of the Homeowners Association. Jason felt his pulse roar in his ears. Brenda had always been a nightmare to deal with, micromanaging lawns, issuing ridiculous fines for unauthorized garden gnomes, and treating the neighborhood as if it were a personal kingdom. But this was a whole new level of audacity. Brenda, arms crossed, tilted her head and let out an exaggerated sigh, as if she were the victim in all this. "You weren't in compliance, Jason," she said, her voice laced with fake sympathy. "So, I fixed the problem." Jason's blood pressure spiked. Fixed? He clenched his fists, barely containing the anger bubbling inside him. "What the hell are you talking about?" he demanded. "Those panels were legally installed. I followed every HOA guideline to the letter." Brenda shrugged, her smirk unwavering. "They were an eyesore, and the board agreed they didn't fit the community's aesthetic. So we repurposed them." Jason narrowed his eyes. "Repurposed?" She waved a manicured hand toward the HOA clubhouse at the end of the street. "They're being put to better use." Jason could hardly believe what he was hearing. How had Brenda even managed to remove them? It wasn't like she had climbed onto his roof herself. No, Brenda wasn't the type to get her hands dirty. But Jason had seen the security footage. She had sent a group of HOA-approved workers, probably under some bogus directive, to dismantle his solar panels in the dead of night. They had used ladders, tools, and everything necessary to strip his property bare while he slept, all under Brenda's smug authority. Now, standing in his yard, she had the audacity to act like she had done him a favor. His solar panels, the ones he had paid for, installed, and legally owned, had been stolen from his home, and were now supposedly powering the HOA's clubhouse. His fists itched to hit something, preferably a lawsuit right into Brenda's smug face. "This is theft," Jason growled. "I have security footage, Brenda. You had no legal right to do this." Brenda's smirk faltered for half a second before she rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, Jason," she cooed, tilting her head as if speaking to a misbehaving child. "I'm the HOA, and the HOA makes the rules." Jason felt his fingers twitch around the phone in his pocket. He could call the cops right now, but he knew how this would go. Brenda had covered her bases. She had a history of sneaking in last-minute amendments to HOA rules, buried in legal jargon no one read. She thrived on technicalities and intimidation, wielding her tiny bit of power like a dictator. Jason's gaze flickered to the small crowd gathering on the sidewalk. His neighbors had heard the commotion. Some whispered among themselves, exchanging looks of disbelief and unease. But none of them stepped forward. Fear. That was how Brenda controlled them. And if Jason let this slide, he'd be next. Brenda turned to leave, flipping her over-bleached hair dramatically. As she strutted toward her golf cart, the same one Jason had seen on his security footage hauling away his stolen property, she called over her shoulder. "Oh, and Jason, that ridiculous electric fence of yours? Take it down. It's against code." Jason's heart pounded as he watched her drive off, leaving nothing but tire marks, stolen solar panels, and a newfound determination burning in his chest. That was it. This was war. Brenda had no idea what was coming for her. Jason paced back and forth in his living room, hands clenched into fists. The more he replayed the security footage of Brenda and her cronies dismantling his solar panels, the more his anger boiled. He could hear their laughter, see the smug satisfaction on Brenda's face as she hauled away his property like it was some cheap lawn ornament. Filing a complaint wouldn't work. Brenda controlled the HOA board. Even if he took legal action, she would drown him in endless bureaucratic red tape. No, if Jason wanted justice, he had to be smart. He had to be ruthless. And, most importantly, he had to be a little bit evil. That's when the idea hit him. A spark of inspiration turned into a fully formed, diabolically brilliant plan. He grinned for the first time all day. If Brenda thought she could steal from him without consequences, she was about to get the shock of her life. Jason grabbed his tools and got to work. First, he ordered a brand new set of solar panels. Bigger, better, and even more powerful than the ones Brenda had stolen. But instead of installing them on his roof again, he mounted them directly onto his electric fence. The same electric fence that Brenda had been trying to get removed for months. The irony was delicious. But Jason didn't stop there. He modified the wiring, ensuring that anyone who touched the fence or the new solar panels would receive a harmless but humiliating jolt. Nothing dangerous, of course, just a low-voltage zap that would serve as the perfect lesson in karma. If Brenda or her goons tried to take these panels, they wouldn't just be stealing. They'd be getting an electrifying surprise. Jason tested everything carefully. The system was flawless. The moment someone reached for the fence or the panels, they'd get a sharp, unexpected zap. It wouldn't hurt them, but it would definitely make them think twice before trying to steal from him again. As the sun set, Jason stepped back and admired his handiwork. His property was now protected. And the best part? He knew Brenda wouldn't be able to resist taking the bait. She had stolen from him once, and her ego wouldn't let her back down. She would try again. And when she did, Jason would be watching, from the comfort of his porch, with a beer in hand, and a front row seat to karma in action. That night, Jason could barely sleep. Not out of nerves, but out of pure anticipation. He had set up cameras to capture every angle of his yard, ensuring that every second of Brenda's inevitable humiliation would be recorded. The next morning, Jason went about his day as if nothing had happened. He mowed his lawn, watered his plants, even waved casually to a few neighbors who were clearly whispering about the HOA scandal. Everyone knew what Brenda had done, but no one dared to challenge her publicly. Fear kept him in check. But after today, that fear would be gone. Around noon, it happened. The familiar hum of Brenda's golf cart echoed down the street. Jason didn't even have to look. He already knew exactly who it was. She pulled up with two of her most loyal minions, Todd and Greg, both looking as reluctant as ever. Brenda stepped out dramatically, oversized sunglasses perched on her nose, arms crossed like she was about to issue a royal decree. "Jason," she called out, loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. "I see you've decided to ignore HOA regulations again." Jason turned off his hose and wiped his hands on his jeans, giving her his best confused expression. "Violations?" he asked innocently. "I don't recall breaking any rules." Brenda let out an exaggerated sigh, as if she were speaking to a misbehaving child. "The HOA has strict policies about the aesthetic harmony of our neighborhood," she announced, gesturing toward his fence. "And your little science project is an eyesore." Jason fought the urge to grin. She had no idea. "I gave you a chance to comply voluntarily," Brenda continued. "But since you refuse, I have no choice but to remove them again." Jason folded his arms. "Oh, you mean steal them again?" Todd and Greg exchanged nervous glances, but Brenda didn't flinch. She was too deep in her own delusions of power. "Confiscate," she corrected smugly. "And since you clearly don't learn your lesson, I'll be adding a fine this time. A substantial one." Jason nodded slowly, as if considering her words. "Let me get this straight," he said. "You're planning to break onto my property again and take something that belongs to me?" Brenda gave him a tight smile. "Jason, you really need to stop thinking of it that way. This is about community standards, and as president of the HOA, it's my responsibility to enforce them. Jason barely suppressed his grin. Well, he said, stepping aside and gesturing toward the fence, go ahead. Brenda's smile widened. She thought she had won. She turned to Todd and Greg. Well, get to work. Todd hesitated. Brenda, are we sure about this? Last time, people were kind of upset about. Brenda snapped her fingers impatiently. Oh, stop being dramatic, Todd. It's just solar panels. Do you want your HOA privileges revoked? Todd swallowed hard and stepped forward. Todd, being the unfortunate guinea pig, reached out first. The moment his fingers grazed the panel, zap, a crackling jolt surged through him, his entire body spasming as if he had just licked a live wire. His hair shot up like he had been struck by lightning, his arms flailed, and with a strangled yelp, he stumbled backward, barely keeping his balance. Greg, reacting on instinct, reached out to steady his friend. Bad move. The moment his hand made contact with Todd's arm, zap, a second shock coursed through both of them, sending Greg straight to the ground with a loud thud. What the? He gasped, rolling onto his side, his eyes wide with confusion and betrayal. Brenda, oblivious to what had just happened, scoffed. Oh, for heaven's sake, you two are acting like children. Just grab the panels already. With an exasperated huff, she strode forward, her manicured fingers reaching for the nearest frame. Big mistake. Zap! A sharp electrical crackle filled the air as the current leapt through her. Brenda let out a full-blown horror movie scream, her arms flailing wildly as she stumbled backward in shock. Her foot caught on the edge of Jason's flower bed, and with a spectacular lack of grace, she tumbled straight into a dense row of bushes, landing with an undignified squawk. For a moment, there was only silence, and then a single chuckle from the crowd, then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire neighborhood erupted into laughter. Some people actually doubled over, wiping away tears. Others clapped. A few even whistled in approval. Jason, leaning casually against his fence, finally got to enjoy the sweet, sweet taste of revenge. Oh dear, he mused, barely suppressing a grin. Looks like my property protection system is working just fine. Brenda, humiliated but still defiant, threatened to call the police. Her face was a mix of rage and desperation as she pointed a shaking finger at Jason. This is illegal. You assaulted us. But Jason was ready. He folded his arms, a smug grin creeping across his face. Oh, please do call them, he said. In fact, let's show them the security footage of you and your team trespassing, vandalizing my property, and stealing my solar panels. For the first time, Brenda hesitated. The color drained from her face as she glanced at Todd and Greg, both still recovering from their humiliating shocks. The murmurs of the gathered neighbors grew louder, their curiosity now shifting into something more dangerous: outrage. Jason pulled out his phone, ready to play the footage for the entire neighborhood to see. You want to talk about illegal, Brenda? Let's discuss theft. He tapped the screen, and the video began rolling. Crystal clear footage showed Brenda's golf cart loaded with stolen solar panels, her giving orders as the HOA workers dismantled them, and worst of all, her smug expression as she drove off with stolen property. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some neighbors had suspected Brenda was corrupt, but now they had undeniable proof. Then came the real bombshell. Richard, a longtime HOA board member who had mostly stayed out of Brenda's power games, cleared his throat. He stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. Actually, Jason, after last night's incident, some of us on the board decided to audit the HOA's finances. And what we found was troubling. Brenda stiffened. Richard, don't. Richard ignored her. He pulled out a folder filled with printed documents. Brenda, the HOA funds were supposed to be used for community improvements. But instead, we found receipts for a luxury spa membership, fine dining, personal shopping sprees, and a Peloton bike, all charged to the HOA account. A collective gasp erupted from the crowd. You embezzled HOA funds for your personal expenses, Richard continued, shaking his head in disappointment. We have receipts. We have the records. And now, thanks to Jason, We also have proof that you've been abusing your power for years." Brenda's entire body tensed. She was trapped. A neighbor, Mike, who had been fined multiple times for the length of his grass, stepped forward. "So that's where all our ridiculous HOA fines went. To your fancy dinners and spa days." Another neighbor shouted, "She fined me for having a red mailbox, but she's out here living off our HOA dues." Brenda's control over the neighborhood shattered in an instant. The people she had bullied and manipulated for years were done. The murmurs turned into full-blown outrage. Some neighbors whipped out their phones, snapping pictures of the documents Richard held, already spreading the scandal online. "You can't prove," Brenda started, but Jason held up his phone. "Oh, we can. And if that's not enough, let's check the security footage of you stealing thousands of dollars worth of solar panels." Brenda's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. Then, the moment that sealed her fate, Richard turned to the crowd. "As of now, I am calling an emergency HOA vote. Effective immediately, Brenda is removed as president." Those in favor, a roar of approval erupted from the crowd. Hands shot into the air. Even Todd and Greg, still slightly dazed from their shocks, raised their hands. Brenda was done. She let out a strangled sound, somewhere between a growl and a sob, before storming off toward her golf cart. Her reign of terror was over. Jason watched with pure satisfaction as she sped off down the street, probably for the last time. By the next morning, peace had returned to the neighborhood. The HOA board wasted no time cleaning up Brenda's mess. The stolen solar panels returned to Jason. The unfair HOA rules being rewritten, and the absurd HOA fines Brenda had issued refunded to the community. Jason woke up, stepped onto his porch, and took in the fresh air of a Brenda-free neighborhood. The birds were singing, the sun was shining, and best of all, his electric fence remained untouched. Mike walked over with a grin, handing Jason a cold beer. That, he said, was the most satisfying thing I've ever seen. Jason clinked his bottle against Mike's. To Brenda-free living. Across the street, Richard was already helping draft new HOA policies to prevent future corruption. The neighborhood had finally come together, realizing they were stronger than one petty tyrant. As Jason sipped his beer, he thought back to the chaos of the last few days. The stolen panels, the electric fence, the shock of justice, and he couldn't help but smile. Karma had never felt so good. Lessons from the story. Stand up for yourself. Bullies and power-hungry individuals like Brenda thrive on fear. Jason's story teaches us that standing up for ourselves, even when the odds seem stacked against us, is always worth it. If we stay silent, we allow injustice to continue. Community is stronger than corruption. Brenda controlled the HOA for years through intimidation, but the moment the neighborhood came together, she lost all her power. When people unite against wrongdoing, change is inevitable. Justice comes in many forms. Sometimes, the best way to defeat a manipulative person isn't through direct confrontation, but by using their own arrogance against them. Jason's clever thinking ensured Brenda got exactly what she deserved, without him breaking a single law. Karma always finds its way. Brenda's downfall wasn't just about Jason's plan. It was the result of years of dishonesty and abuse of power. The lesson? You can only get away with bad behavior for so long before it comes back to bite you. The deeper message. At its core, this story is about justice, resilience, and the power of community. It's a reminder that no matter how small one person may feel, they can make a difference when they stand up for what's right. Brenda's abuse of power represents a common struggle, whether it's in neighborhoods, workplaces, or even governments. But as Jason proved, a little strategy and persistence can turn the tables on anyone who misuses their authority. It's also a story about boundaries. We all have a right to protect what's ours, whether that's our home, our values, or our peace of mind. My personal take. This story resonated with me because it's not just about petty HOA drama. It's about something much bigger. It's about the fight against unfairness, about those moments when we feel powerless but choose to take a stand anyway. I loved how Jason didn't just react with anger. He thought ahead. He found a way to fight back smartly instead of engaging in a losing battle. That's something we can all learn from. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's proving that no one can control you. And let's be honest, watching a power-hungry Karen get taken down in the most humiliating way possible, that's just satisfying. If you enjoyed this story and love tales of justice, revenge, and karma, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. At Story Precious, we bring you the most thrilling, engaging, and satisfying stories. Because sometimes, reality is even better than fiction. Don't miss out. Subscribe now and be part of our community of justice seekers.